What we've got here is a picture of the Trumbull Railroad at Trumbull. This is where the railroads actually started in Dyer County. This is an 1861 railroad map. As you see, there were no trains here in Dyer County at that time. Okay. I'll give her a few minutes. If anybody wants to step on the scale and see how much they weigh, it still works. It can weigh up to 10,000 pounds. Talk to Darren about this. Okay, I think we're good now. I'll try to talk fast so the next one comes through, we won't have that problem. But anyway, the railroad started basically in the this is the 1860s. By the late 1850s, they were trying to build the railroad from Paducah to Union City, meant to go on down, and then another one called the Mississippi Valley Railroad was trying to come to the north. This was the Ohio and New Orleans Railroad. They had the misfortune, though, of getting the track to about Union City about the time of the Civil War. Now, in 1861 is when this line came through to Union City, and they probably would have come on through Dyer County because they were heading south as early as the early 1860s if it had not have been for the war. If you know anything about this Civil War, at that time Kentucky was a neutral state. Tennessee was a Confederate state, but there was military action up around Columbus, and that was Confederate fort. The Union Army occupied Paducah. This railroad right here happened to be, as I say, complete to that point, but the Federal Army occupied Paducah, got their equipment. The Confederate Army essentially tore up the tracks to keep them from using it because they didn't want a railroad on their Columbus's flank. The Mississippi Valley River Railroad never really materialized as far as a track route through Dyer County particularly, though there may have been some work done on it. You see, 1858, the Mississippi River Railroad was formed. 1860, New Orleans, Ohio reaches Tennessee, Kentucky line, and the connections made, and the Fulton was formed. And the Paducah and the New Orleans connects with the Mobile, the New Orleans and Ohio Railroad at what they call Troy now. They call it Troy Junction, sometimes Paducah Junction. It's called Reeves, the community of Reeves, just to the south of Union City. This is the map of the railroad at that time, all these railroads coming together. And Union City was the Union of Railroads, and that was the New Orleans and Ohio made it all the way down here before the war. But after the war is when things started. Now this is one of the areas that we're going to, Hiram McCorkle, his diary will be used for a part of this information today, as well as the Dyer County Newbern history written by Arowana Rydens back in the 70s, and a book for the Centennial Book of Newbern written back in the 50s. Don't know exactly where they got their information from all this, other than diaries. But according to Ms. Rydens, in 1868, Dyer said Dyer County again voted not to levy a tax to build a railroad across the Mississippi River. It was voted down by one vote. One thing that you'll find is a lot of times throughout the years in the 1800s, late 1800s to early 1900s, there was several efforts to try to get railroads not only north and south, but east and west. The Mississippi River was a formidable obstacle. It takes federal money to build an interstate bridge. They didn't have that for railroad bridges, and they never could get, you had to have local investors. The cities would have to invest. It took a lot of non-government money from the federal government. They didn't have any. And so apparently this was a time when they tried to do this, but they could not get it done in Dyer County. The Memphis Appeal, in April 1869, there was a route proposed from Brownsville to Newbern. You'll see all kinds of railroads trying to get a start. Majority of them would fail. They would be wrapped up with other railroads. It says, we hope in the interest of Memphis and Dyer County that it is not successful, talking about the Mississippi Valley Railroad that was trying to come from Memphis to Cairo, Illinois. The other one was trying to come from Paducah to Memphis, and they were basically going to meet in Dyer County. We hope it is not successful. Indeed, we know it will not. The Mississippi River Railroad is an assured success. So they thought in April of 1869 that was the route that they would be taking. And apparently there was some grading work done on the Mississippi Valley Railroad. According to Mr. Wyden, did not begin in 1869, was soon disbanded afterwards because several counties refused to levy the taxes necessary. If you think, a lot of times you'll hear the name the figure $50,000. That's a good bit of money, but back then it was a tremendous amount of money. It was like $1.5 million, and these towns were nothing to them much. They didn't have a lot of industry base. They didn't have a lot of. They didn't have good roads. Dyersburg did have a river port that helped them, but still, that coming up with that kind of money was not easy. The Mississippi River Railroad. This is the best investment that it can make. They wanted $250,000 in 1869. The Mississippi Valley Railroad did, which amounts to $5.4 million today from Dyer County to build this railroad. And so the second vote in 1870 was rejected by the voters, so they couldn't get people to tax themselves for a railroad that may or may not make it. People at that time needed railroads, but they were not safe. They were often had a bad public perception. They wrecked a lot, and they were just kind of leery of the whole idea. So in 1872, the real start to a railroad in Dyer County began to take place when the Memphis and Paducah Railroad took over the routes, both the north route from Union City area to Paducah, and proposed route of the Mississippi Valley Railroad. They absorbed both. It's also the Paducah Gulf. That was a railroad that was south of Paducah into the other part of Tennessee, but they absorbed a lot of railroads. And you will find that this is the case, that one railroad will absorb another one. I love this picture. This is Dyersburg Mayor. It says Charlie P. Clark's way was identified. He was the mayor at the time in June 1872 when Dyersburg finally voted $50,000 bond for 126-2 for a railroad, for the Paducah and Memphis Railroad to come through Dyer County. The stipulation in there was that the depot had to be built 1.5 mile from the courthouse. And all of this. More investors, of about $50,000 more, came from the Newbern area and in the surroundings area. The information I've got doesn't specifically say if Newbern, or how much Newbern put in. Do you know if they put in any money at all? Specifically at the town?
Newbern had more investment because they didn't have the rivers.
Right.
Their river like Dyersburg before. So there were some people, wealthy people in Dyersburg that didn't want the river system to go away because they had the steamboats. They owned the steamboats and stuff.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
they were making money on it.
Yeah.
So Newbern would have more business.
Newbern and the area around, they would have another $50,000. This was a total of about $100,000 that this railroad was now getting to build a line. So they proceeded south. They repaired the railroad between Paducah and the state line, and they started south through Obion County, established the community of Obion on the Obion River. Mainly it was a water stop. They had to have water stops periodically for their steam locomotives. And Dyer County, the line was reached April 1873. On the 28th of that month, it ran cars into the Trumbull Station. So they got up to the top of the hill there, coming from the south, and they built a community, started the community, named it after Lawrence S. Trumbull. He was Western Kentucky's U.S. State and House member. He was president of the railroad that originally tried to come through here, vice president of the one that finally made it. But it was Jesse Pierce that had about 200 acres at Trumbull, and he donated 5 of them, or sold it off to them, 5 acres for the railroad to come through. His stipulation, he wanted it to be called Pierce Station. But there was a Pierce just southwest of Fulton, between Fulton and Union City. So it wound up being named after Lawrence S. Trumbull. Instead of Pierce, Tennessee, we have Trumbull, Tennessee. But that's where the railroad came to a stop. And this is what really surprised a lot of people in Dyer County. This is what's called a Y. It's a 3-point turnaround for a locomotive. If you don't have a turntable, you have this Y. Are y'all able to hear with that air on back there? Okay, I didn't know how that was affecting or not. Somewhere in so this is where we think that the Y was at Trumbull. When they came over the line, they built it possibly right in here on the north side. May have been down in this area, but it was somewhere in this area that they built a Y, the Paducah-Memphis Railroad. And then they told Dyer County, said, we're here in the county as it stipulates, we want our money. They thought they would continue on south. They got to Trumbull, built this, and stopped. And it caused quite a bit of commotion. It said thousands, Airline Riders report, thousands of dollars had been subscribed by businessmen to bring the railroad through Newbern. Then a most aggravating thing occurred. The railroad stopped laying tracks just south of Trumbull. The money was supposed to be given in 4 installments, and when they got to Trumbull, they asked for 3 of the installments right away. They wound up getting most of the money. It says the obstacle was soon overcome, and the first train in Newbern was a low locomotive with flats cars carrying railroad ties and supplies to the workmen. A lot of prison labor was used during this time for these railroad tracks. Laying tracks south of Newbern. And she has it 1874, possibly 1873, but other information we're going to see doesn't indicate that the tracks got here until about 1881. So this is one of the confusing things. Like I say, I don't know where she got this information, and that's not a gospel fact is what I'm trying to say. But anyway, the tracks were headed that way, but then in 1874, there was the dirt work and grading got started, and there were high hopes back in the public that this thing would finally reach Dyersburg. This is one of the articles from the Dyersburg Progress, sometimes referred to as Dyer County Progress, April 1873. We learned from one of the contractors that the work would be pushed rapidly to Newbern. The spirits of Newbern, people of Newbern are in high spirits. But by May of 1873, it is thought that the trains from Paducah will reach Newbern about the 1st of July, as they are now running within about 8 miles of the place. The proposed Humboldt Railroad, which they meant to come from Humboldt through possibly Tiptonville and across the river, will probably cross at Newbern, which will render it an important railroad center. What was going on nationally at this time, though, was a financial crisis. It was beginning to build, and it would have a major impact in what happened here. The train schedule, they actually had one from Paducah to Trumbull. It only took about 4.5 hours to make the run. That's 73 miles. One of the things is the train didn't go very fast. This, from what I understand, the tracks that they used were 56-pound rails. Now, if you don't know anything about the rails, that's 56 pounds per 3 feet. And that's a way you measure how tough the rails are and how fast you can go. What's out here, that train just traveled over, is 136 pounds. So these tracks were thin. They were probably cheaply made, but that was just kind of the standard that they were at the time. That's the reason it took so long. This is all the stops included. It doesn't show all the stops, but you'd have more stops than that, but it still took 4.5 hours. Considering the fact that you walked or rode a horse or used a wagon for that same distance, all you had to do was sit, and for 4.5 hours you'd be there. I imagine that was pretty impressive for the time. Like I said, the average was around 20 miles an hour, took 4.5 hours, and then things began to still was in high hopes here in 1873 in July. We were informed that grading is within 2 miles of Newbern, and cars should be running there by the 1st of September. The people of Newbern will have reason to be delighted with the prospect of becoming a town of considerable importance. When you look at the railroads, there was a division when the railroad companies would want to come to Dyer County. Some of them would want to come to Dyersburg, some of them would want to come to Newbern. Like Earl said, the steamboats was still in operation at Dyersburg, and that was going to be competition for them. So that's probably one reason why behind the scene politics and things like that probably had a lot of reason to do with why division was split. By July of 1873, though, the Dyersburg Gazette was saying this: the Paducah-Memphis Railroad has $50,000 of Dyersburg bonds and $50,000 of individual stock from our citizens. The time for which it promised a railroad connection to our town has passed, and no contract has been let. While we are sorry for our town, we congratulate Newbern on her fair prospects of becoming the trading center of Dyer County. But it will be a terrible slam on Dyersburg. They're not very happy about what's going on with this. Then August, the snail approaches Newbern. That's what they call the railroad. The snail approaches Newbern. How long, oh how long, will Dyersburg have to pay interest on her railroad bonds? And wait. Between Newbern and Dyersburg, the railroad is lying in masterly inactivity. If he only knew, it'd be about 1882 before the rails would actually reach Dyersburg. I imagine he would have had a real fit. Dyersburg Progress in 1873. The contract in Newbern has been finished. We are anxious to have the work go on, probably talking about the dirt work. Our people are dissatisfied and impatient. They are all discontented, and they want to see this work go on. Railroads were losing their luster now. They had promised and still hadn't managed to make it. But the Dyersburg Progress in January was still a little bit on the positive side. It's pleasing to know that the Paducah Railroad has fared well, and it has in the financial panic. Captain T.C. Smith has just finished grading the Lewis Creek bottoms, and another contractor has finished pilings across the Forkadeer River. So that in the course of 2 to 3 months, the whole line from here to Trimble will be ready for iron. When spring opens, the railroad will be pushing forward with renewed energy. But it did not until the work continued on and off until September of 1874. And the court records later indicated there was no tracks finished to Newbern by that time. In 1877, all this got reorganized under what they call the Memphis, Paducah, and Northern Railroad, but nothing really new happened. No passenger trains were scheduled south of Trimble. And in 1877, Brownsville to Newbern route was proposed, but this time the city actually apparently put up a $25,000 tax, though obviously no track was ever built. I don't know what happened to the tax, but it was another effort to get another train in here besides the one that they were actually having to deal with. Then the Chesapeake in Ohio and Southwestern came along. This was their parent company was the Chesapeake in Ohio that operated from Chicago toward the East Coast. It was formed in the late 1870s. It bought all the Paducah and Memphis track rights through Dyer County in 1880. If you go to the Register of Deeds office and look at the deeds, this property that we're sitting on now was bought by the C&O in 1880. I don't know if that depot was built at that time, but it was built that obviously a little bit later. But they bought the tracks through here, the property through here in 1880. Not directly related to Chesapeake and Ohio. It is a subsidiary company off of that. But it had some of the same backers, including famed railroad builder Collis P. Huntington of the C&O. A lot of that money would funnel into trying to get this thing operational. This paper is uncertain, but on November the 5th, 1881, the Chesapeake in Ohio is now rapidly being constructed through our county. Track laying core will reach Newbern in a week, and we expect cars to Dyersburg by Christmas. That would be pretty much accurate. It would be a little bit more than a week before they got to Newbern, but and to Dyersburg it would be just another month or so after that. But they were now getting the actual tracks to Dyersburg. From the diaries of Mr. McCorkle here in Newbern, it said on November 18th, 1881, the first steam engine with the passenger coach arrived in Newbern. It was a cold, rainy day, and then the rain in the night turned to ice. And they were having some cold weather back then, too. But that's the first indication, really, that the trains actually made it here. Now, the train schedules would be a little bit later. When they run track, they just didn't start running passenger service. It was a little bit on the other side. Memphis Appeal, November 30th of that month. The arrival of the first train in Newbern was the occasion of the assembling of vast concourse of citizens round about who hailed the event as the beginning of a new era of prosperity in that part of the world. I bet they partied here. After all these years and all those time and all that trouble with the other railroad, they finally had one here in Newbern, and it was heading down toward Dyersburg. By January of 1882, it had reached, probably in that time frame, it had reached Dyersburg. We have the scheduling that came out on the books I've seen in quarters, they come out every quarter, had Newbern listed as a stop in 1881, in November. The next time the schedule came out was April of 1882, and Dyersburg was listed as a stop at that point, but it would go no further. Neal's Gazette, January 15th, 1882. Passenger and freight trains will commence regular trips next Monday, January 23rd. The railroad turntable is in place is only temporary. Dyersburg will be the southern rail terminus for 3 months to come. The telegraph office used by the railroad will be thrown open to the public. That was another thing. The telegraph is coming to town. Whoopee! Dyersburg is now connected to the outside world by rail, telegraph, and steamboat. So they're happy. They're all happy, but it won't last too much longer. It says, carry the news to Mary. Who Mary is, I don't know. Captain Charlie Clark, one of the most efficient conductors, and they call the conductors captains at the time, in the South, will bring the first passenger train into Dyersburg by Monday night. The railroad depot building at Dyersburg, the railroad building, depot building at Dyersburg, the brickwork is finished, and 10 men are now rushing forward the woodwork. It will be completed within 4 weeks. And if they kept their promise about the courthouse and the depot being within half a mile of it, if you measure that distance from where the depot was on Cedar Street, or Depot Street was referred to at that time, to the courthouse is exactly 1/2 mile. They probably did it because of geography, because Dyersburg is in the bluff and that down there is in the lowlands. They were able to cut through and level it off a little bit. This is the Dyersburg Depot back probably in the 30s. It's not, I don't know if it's that one that they built at the time then. I've heard this one was built 1890. If that's the case, then that's obviously not what they had there. I'm not sure about that though. But the C&O and Southwestern had railroad troubles with them. They refused to build Dyersburg and Newbern depots without more local money. They also refused to maintain a wooden East Court Street bridge. The bridge over East Court that we know is 104 now, and 2 lanes in concrete, was a single wooden structure built by the Paducah and Memphis when they did the dirt work through Dyersburg. Dyersburg, when they went bankrupt, the railroad went bankrupt, Dyersburg had to wind up going out and getting and maintaining that bridge. So you can see the bridge right there in the corner. But imagine by that time it was back in the bridge like you know now. But Dyersburg and investors wind up taking the railroads to court. And one of the things that we've learned, how we learn a lot of this, is through court records. The railroad was told that the judge ruled that Dyersburg and the investors around Dyersburg and Newbern had to come up with more money for depots. They weren't included like they thought they would be. But Dyersburg won with the bridge. They said that the railroad, even though they didn't build the bridge, it was part of the railroad property. It was part of the reason it was built was because of the railroad. They wound up having to maintain the railroad bridge. So they kind of split the divide, and this kind of still left a bad taste in people's mouths. This is the Newbern Depot that sits basically here from about that wall back to the end of the building. There was a platform where you are now. This was photographed as an Illinois Central Railroad later, but it was probably built by the C&O and SW maybe in 1881. Really don't know exactly when that structure there was built. That was the main depot in the area. It's a lot of traffic through here. This is being the waiting rooms and the freight room down at the end. You see the cars over here where they can load and unload. We have that still with this depot. That track is right under the ground. We can come in from one end and out the other. This was a common thing for the depots at the time. That's a picture inside that depot. J.E. Miller, the station master, is right there. He was the last station master of that building, the first one of this building that came along in 1920. Now we've got Dyersburg through the schedules through the end of April 1882. You see Paducah Junction then East Troy, they had different, that's like Polk, and then there are different names for these signs. Troy and Union City, Troy was the county seat at the time, Old County, but they missed it. They went by it. Spur line was built from what's called Moffett to Troy, but a lot of times that with the main line bypassed Troy at the time. They actually bypassed Union City. They didn't go directly downtown. The CNO&SW, the 8-mile trip from Newbern to Dyersburg took about 30 minutes. Like I said, the track weight was about 56 to 70 pounds, but the track size was about 5 feet when they first started out through Trimble. It's now 4 feet 8.5 inches. That was standard gauge. That's standard gauge today. That weird measurement, 4 feet 8.5 inches, really came from England and wound up in the northeastern United States. And at the time of the Civil War, the southern railroads were mainly on a 5-foot wide track a lot of times. But when they went to build the Transcontinental Railroad, those politicians in the Northeast who controlled the political system at the time, because there was no one from the South that having a say-so, decided that 4 feet 8.5 inches would be the standard gauge that they would build the Transcontinental Railroad. They didn't want to tear their own railroads up, so those trains could connect in with that train. You read during the Civil War, a lot of times armies trying to transport around would get to a town and they'd have to change trains simply because of the gauge. When it was easy to move the track, but the equipment was already set up for that 5-foot system. This is why probably when the railroad started out from Paducah after the Civil War, not all of it was tore up. The track could be moved, but the equipment could not, and so they just basically utilized the equipment they had, which happened to be 5 feet. When the Chesapeake, Ohio, and Southwestern came in, they reduced it all down to the standard gauge, which is meant that all the tracks that's ever come through Newbern were probably the standard 4 feet 8.5 inches. So they had to get all the equipment and do away with the other. The first train to Memphis would be in July of 1882, but this is kind of surprising. They didn't wait. They decided to make a train ride themselves, the people around here throughout this area, without the bridge over the Hatchie River being completed. The bridge over the Hatchie River with its supports, and it was a drawbridge, from my understanding too, because steamboats went up that, was about 4,000 feet. So what they did, the first true passengers from Paducah from Memphis happened June 20th, 1882. The passengers ferried across the Hatchie River from one train to the next. So they went down as far as they could, got either in a boat to go across the river or planked the bridge if it was done enough, and walked across, got on a train, and went on to Memphis. That was their excitement for the day, to do things like that. That was highly unusual. The railroad was supposed to have been completed by May, but flooding waters prevented, mainly around the Hatchie River, that problem with the completion of it. But it was still undergoing. The Memphis to Paducah route was finally completed July 13, 1882, at the Hatchie River with what they called a Golden Spike ceremony, attended by many dignitaries from both sides, from Paducah to Memphis, including the corporals from Newbern, who was allowed to help drive that spike. The long-awaited railroad, according to the corporal diaries, and the railroad celebrating its completion by complimenting several men of the outstanding businessmen on a trial run the train to Memphis. When the train reached the Hatchie River, it stopped, and the first ceremony took place. Mr. H.R.A. McCorkle of Newbern was given the honor of driving the last spike over the railroad, over the river. So finally, at July 13, 1882, this route, which had started essentially back in 1858, somewhere in that area, finally made it completed. This is our area right here. This is the Ohio, Chesapeake and Ohio connections within this area. So it was connected now to a good part of the area, up to the north anyway. But they still weren't happy with the operations of the Chesapeake and Ohio. It would be a great blessing to the road and to immense satisfaction to the public if Colonel Montserrat superintendent now, he could stop so many inexcusable accidents onto the C&O. We don't charge a cent for this suggestion, but it is worth a heap to the road. They were very unhappy with it, and they would let him know it. The Chesapeake and Ohio was eventually incorporated into the Newport News and Mississippi Valley Railroad. As you see, it connected up to the south down to New Orleans. Established in 1879, officially came to Dyer County through mergers in 1874. A lot of people who did not keep up with railroads thought we've got a new railroad. They had no idea it was the same railroad, just under a different name. If you go to the courthouse and look at the records, all the purchases made by this Newport News Mississippi Valley Railroad are still listed as C&O and SW all the way up until Illinois Central takes over. So they were operating with the same money from the parent company, but just under a different name. Dyersburg there at the end of the arrow, you see the Moffett to Troy connection right up there. This was about the 1880s. The Newport News and Mississippi Valley Railroad, like I said, had first train to Dyersburg in 1884, and they just didn't realize that it was still under a different name. Memphis Daily Appeal, Newbern has some of the best businessmen for its size, and they ship more cotton, corn, wheat, stock, mules, cattle, and hogs by rail than any town in the U.S. of less than 1,000 in its population. The railroads really helped the economy around here more than anything else that they could have brought in. Steamboats were limited in what they could do. This could go for, Newbern was a huge livestock and agricultural place. Right over here across this track was the stockyards. And lots of animals were shipped out during this time frame. Considering that, the roads being dirt, horses being used, I imagine downtown Newbern was not a nice smelling place. But still, the money was coming in. And that's the main thing that they really wanted. The 1888 Newport News and Mississippi Railroad map, it is kind of interesting because they have Findlay about where Rowan is. And Dyersburg here. And the tracks went through the west side of Covington. When you go down to Covington, that 5-lane strip was the old railroad bed. Where they come in, the railroad comes in like this and the highway, and then they divide out. Used to the railroad went straight. And when Illinois Central took over later, they put it on the east side of town. And I really don't know why, but they just decided to move it. But still, that's it was a depot on the west side somewhere, but it did not affect really Dyer County. It was still operational for the entire time. We had lots of agricultural goods going out of Dyersburg as well. One thing though was lumber. Lumber was a huge operation as well. Here comes another attempt to build a railroad across the Mississippi River. They wanted, 1889, Newbern voted a tax of $25,000 to build a railroad from Humboldt to Tiptonville, 202 to 22. This was the Missouri, Tennessee, and Georgia Railroad. And obviously it went nowhere. You'll see a lot of these efforts that the effort here was that, and this was another one, there were competing proposals at this time. Once this line is built between Dyersburg and Jackson and Dyersburg, it will only be the beginning of the great diagonal line which will connect Kansas City, the great grain and meat market of the West, and Birmingham, the center of the great iron and manufacturing of the South. This was the Birmingham, Jackson, and Kansas City Railroad. You had two proposals to bring railroads across Dyer County on an east-west line. The Mississippi River always stopped them because of the potential of the cost of mainly a bridge as well as trying to get the tracks laid that distance. From the Camden Chronicle, the people of Dyersburg will vote on June 10th for a proposition to issue $45,000 in bonds to that Birmingham, Jackson, Kansas City Railroad. But something happened. By later on, it said the directors of the Birmingham, Jackson, and Kansas City have withdrawn their proposition to Dyersburg to run their line from that town, and now the said road will be built at a point between Dyersburg and Newbern. They weren't going to run it to either location. They were going to put it out there by Grecians, I guess, crossing somewhere in there. That would have been interesting to see. But something happened and made them mad. That was the end of that proposal. Then in 1896, something that would benefit Dyer County by rail more than anything else happened, and that was the acquisition of the Louisville to Memphis route by Illinois Central. Illinois Central would do more to locally help individuals and companies and businesses than most any other railroads to date. The Illinois Central, this was the Louisville, Memphis connection. They were out of Iowa and Illinois, and they were extending down Memphis to New Orleans. Our mile markers here at this station, about 304, puts you to Louisville. It does not go up to Chicago. Now all the railroad is this right here through Mississippi and up into Illinois. This part's basically gone as far as a mainline route, but our mile markers here are still based on that original route back in 1896. The Southern Home Seeker's Guide of 1896 was talking about Newbern. It said during 1896, no fewer than 225 cars of wheat, 350 cars of corn, 5 of hay, 15 of tobacco, and 70 of lumber were shipped from Newbern. And then Trumbull, according to that same publication, shipped 73 cars of lumber, 126 cars of bolts. I looked that up. It said Flour's about to put out a seed. I don't think they were talking about metal bolts. I don't know how they would have made that many. 6 of flour, 40 of wheat, 22 of hogs, 5 of cattle, 3 of sheep. So Newbern and Trumbull were prospering because of the railroad. Dyersburg was too. This was one of the few photographs, the only one really I have, of what was the Trumbull Depot right there. Just a little side railroad, and that was the platform. There was probably no waiting room. It was just a very whistle-stop type operation. In 1899, something that would become a big thing in Dyer County, the A.M. Stevens Lumber Company, located in Dyersburg, started asking the possibility of a branch line from Dyersburg westward to the edge of their logging camps and roads in the bottomlands down by the Mississippi River, Forkadeer, and Old Vine, were all coming together. This would be west of Big Boy Junction. And the Illinois Central Railroad looked at that, and they must have agreed to it because they liked what they saw, because this is what they wound up with. This is from the Dyer County Historical Society map. This up in here would be in the vicinity of where Ford Construction is. This went through Richwood to what they call Stevens Junction, the original Camp Stevens, down to Tiger Tail, back up north to what would eventually be known as Minglewood. All told, it was a 20-mile branch line that they built with no town directly serviced by it. So they must have really thought that it looked profitable to do that. Railroads were always built from one town to the next. There was always a point involved. But this one, in this particular case, was a huge spur line just for lumber. And they sprung up out of it, and it helped a lot with the progress of the area as far as making Dyersburg a huge lumber operation. They would ship out, bring it to Dyersburg. There was a mill. Stevens had a mill in Dyersburg, a lumber mill. The lumber mills were in the area around here, particularly with Minglewood. And they got a lot of transportation out of that way. These next few pictures, we're finally getting into pictures rather than just pictures of stock from the map, was from Dyer County Historical Society page about the Minglewood Railroad. That is built by the Illinois Central, but that is not, I don't believe, an Illinois Central locomotive. It's called old van is what they call it. It was a lumber train. A lot of times lumber trains were what they call narrow gauge, so it'd be less than 4/8 width, but this was standard gauge. If you haven't seen the video or know a lot about Minglewood, I would suggest you go to their Facebook page and look that video up. It's quite extensive. I've just got the railroad pictures here, but they had factories, homes, doctor, schools. And what's amazing, music, you can listen to music from it. What's amazing to me is the number of photographs. I mean, basically you'll get some newspaper articles or occasionally a photograph, but there's a lot that deals with this. This is people standing on one of the railroad bridges. They had railroad sloughs in the area. I go back, like right here was a bridge, this was a bridge, this was a bridge. Old Vine River's here and here, and this is where the Forkadeer join it, so it's all down in this area here. This is one in front of one of those bridges. Lumber operations, they cut lots of trees. down there. I don't know what trees, a certain type of tree they were looking for, but they would haul it out on that railroad and back to the mills and back to the operations. This is one of the steam locomotives. The type of equipment used, don't know for 100% for sure if that's Minglewood or not. I don't know Central people. I showed this to look at that right there, and either they borrowed that locomotive or they don't think it was that operation exactly. That's a shade locomotive with those wheels on the outside like that years. But this is the type that they would use. It was a slow burning, probably wood burning train operation. They had wagons. They were putting it on the tracks. That was a lot of back-breaking work. They had probably hand sawed. I don't think they had power saws like we do now. They would do it all by hand, haul it as far as they can. Minglewood, elevated train tracks. That's one thing, because lots of elevated buildings down there, because you're by two rivers. The Mississippi's not far away. Flooding was a huge concern. Elevation of the tracks, elevation of a lot of things. They had the water tower. So this one ended up really being a big operation. There's another photograph of the area, Minglewood with the elevated tracks again. That took a lot of maintenance. The Illinois Central put a lot of money into this. One of the bridges, the same bridge most likely, the train over, the lumber train coming out. It did have passenger service, freight service, all their supplies were brought in on the train. It would take about 2 to 3 hours to get down there. It depends on where they went. About an hour and a half right here, about almost 2 hours. The Tiger Tail, then they'd turn around and go back. And but that was the Minglewood Railroad. This became just a huge part of the Dyer County operation. Now, off of this, in the early 1900s, somebody got the idea to extend the route from this junction down here, from this track, to Tiptonville. So the Dyersburg to Tiptonville route, the Dyersburg Northern Railroad became a branch off of this Minglewood and Tiger Tail route in 1904. It was built northward to Tiptonville by July 1907, and then rebranded the Chicago, Memphis, and Gulf Railroad and extended the line to Hickman by 1911. This is one of the engines that operated that line. As you see, this map actually shows the lumber route down in there too, and then it shows the line to Hickman, to Tiptonville and Hickman, with the proposed extension back up to the main line near Clinton, Kentucky. That part never did take effect. Photograph of the train from that area, on that line at Dyersburg Depot, the water spout. One thing I encountered when I was researching it was a filter for that thing. They were getting it, I suppose, out of Fort Madera River, which is often down muddy. And there's a paper, a document I've seen, talking about the filter that they could get to use on that so their water would be cleaner when they put it in these locomotives. So they did have things like that to deal with. Cliff Downey has a huge collection of train pictures. We got some of them down there in the museum. This is the Dyersburg Depot. This is the train headed out toward Tiptonville. All these spur lines, this would be the main lines of Illinois Central at the time. Or, yes, Illinois Central at that time, and you probably see a wagon right there. So this is the early 1900s when that was operating. And out of all this, while they were going on building these railroads, here comes yet another proposal to build across the Mississippi River Bridge. The Kansas City to New Madrid to Tiptonville, Dyersburg, Jackson, Birmingham, and Savannah route. Proposed Missouri, Tennessee, and Alabama Railroad in 1908, like all the others that really went nowhere. And this is just those that were published. I wonder how many private conversations there were among businessmen, politicians to get that done. They were just desperate to get across the river. You had bridges at St. Louis, small river, bridges at Memphis, but you didn't have, or a bridge at Memphis, you didn't have anything in between as far as railroad operations. The route from Jackson to Dyersburg then came around. And for the Birmingham and Northwestern wanted to extend its lines from Jackson through Bells, Alamo, Friendship, and ending at Dyersburg. Now, they asked for $50,000 in investment money. This time they got it. It had been a long time since the original fiasco with the Paducah and Memphis and that money. An effort earlier in the middle to have more railroad money from them. Also, they turned it down. Remember back in 1990. Now, it's been long enough. This time they got it. This was a reputable company. It was not an upstart company. They were simply wanting to extend it. I know that Bell's put in $16,000. As far as Alamo and Friendship, I don't know. I do believe Alamo, at least Alamo, maybe Friendship have depot streets, but no depots. The younger generation will make why they call it what they used to have depots there. This is Isaac Burton Tigert. He was the man who was in charge, a young man at that time, in charge of the railroad from Jackson to Dyersburg. He would later on go to found one of the great southern railroads, that would be the Gulf Mobile in Ohio, condition of convergence of a lot of railroads over there at the Jackson area. Map showing Bells, Alamo, and Dyersburg didn't have Friendship in there. A place called Pearson. I'm not sure where that would be located unless it's out there on the bypass area. But still, this railroad is still partly in existence. If you go to Jackson on 412, you'll see that railroad over on your right. And that's the original part of that route. That's not all that's left of it outside a bit of a spur line off of the Dyersburg rail yard down here. This is a picture from the Forkadere River, made date unknown, from the book Reflections of Our Past. These people just stopped on top of that bridge. Notice the woman up here dressed in white, in a steam, a dirty locomotive. This thing was soot and all that. They got out of the cars and they made this picture. It had to be over the Forkadere River. That's a pretty high bridge. They really elevated things up high. This is said to be in Newbern. Date unknown. It is Illinois Central. You can see that right there. That is part of the lumber mill. There is a fly in here. Look at that. So, Main Street, Newbern, believed to be 1918, coming across. The funeral home was built in this area. This is basically made from the depot. We're looking right at it. More spur lines over on this side. Newbern had quite as many as 6 lines, spurs lines. You went that way, you could count across there at one time. They serviced industries, they serviced their different areas. This is the Sanborn fire insurance maps are amazing. They are a link to the past as far as maps. Nobody made maps a lot of times back then. They would put holes, and it was basically an insurance rating map. Today we can look at it and see about what things used to be. This is Eastport Street, 1914. There's that wooden bridge. Even still wooden bridge across there. If you're from Dyersburg, you'll notice that Butterworth is on the other side of the railroad. It comes here, but that's also over here. This is the route from Jackson. This is the Dyersburg Depot. This is the way to Minglewood and Tiptonville down this way. So this is probably the height of railroads in Dyer County. From this line, they were all active with passenger and freight service at that time. Railroads provided everything, your food, your clothes, your transport. You just didn't want to do it by foot. Dyersburg improvements in 1914. We got a 4-stall roundhouse, a boiler house, and a turntable 85 feet long down there in what's now 10 yard. Got pictures of that in just a few minutes of its remains. This is Newbern. Don't know the exact date. This man right here appears to be somebody important with his hat. Look, maybe a doctor. He's tipping his hat to somebody. This is the original depot that was here. Story and a half. We really don't know any more about him than that. This is the Newbern Depot that was here up until 1919. You see the schedule right there. Baggage cars. This water tower was over on the other side. It was a dual line operation. Illinois Central put in dual lines mainly there because they had so much freight traffic. They didn't want to slow down with these one-line tracks to have a lot of sidings, so they mainly have a dual-line operation throughout most of its system. One of the best pictures of downtown Newbern at that time, All these people listen to this guy right here. He's not a preacher. As far as we can tell, he's talking about limestone. Limestone for your gardens, for your farms. Still used today. But look at the crowd. This is about 1950. They come down here in droves to hear a man talk about limestone. All of them have hats. Some of them have umbrellas. One person is even climbing the pole. And one of them's over here in the boxcar. They didn't have a lot to do back then, did they? When you got to bring a crowd for limestone. Try that today and see what happens. There's the water tower. But anyway, I bet he made a lot of money when he was out there selling the limestone. This, by the way, is a crack in it was a glass plate photograph, so it's actually a crack because of that. Now, one of the memories that we have of this depot in this time frame came from a man named Ed Stanfield. He gave the Dyer County, Tennessee newspaper here in Newbern in 1994 a memoir of this. His father worked for the I.C. Railroad in the early 1900s. He said the depot at that time was probably the most important building in town. Probably everything the people used was brought into the depot by trains. Arriving at the depot, the goods were delivered by drag wagons to the places of business. The farmers would sell to buyers corn, wheat, cotton, and other crops which were loaded into freight cars shipped out of town, along with crops, livestock, poultry, and other animals were shipped by rail. Crops such as green beans were put into bushel hampers delivered by passenger trains to their locations. The best odor that came from the depot was the fresh bread by which they would come in on the 3 o'clock passenger train. The bread was packed in buy baskets. After arriving at the grocery store, the air was filled with the odor of fresh bread, which made you very hungry. Gives a personal indication of what was going on with the railroad. But this depot would burn in October 1919. Building was a total loss. Thought it was started with the electrical fire, but there was a lot of gasoline stored in here, and when it reached that, the whole thing exploded. Railroad cars burned. Downtown Newbern was threatened with the fire for a while. The staff had to go into that water tower you saw over across the track. Trains were stopped. The inspector later wrote he wondered if an employee started the fire. So a disgruntled employee may have caused it. Then in 1920, the building that you now stand in or sit in was constructed. This is the oldest photograph we have of it, 1921, off of a postcard. Illinois Central happened to be in the middle of a massive 1916 to 26 upgrade of all its rails and support facilities. So Newbern got a brick depot. We were never a major stop. It was the mail stop, it was a local stop. Dyersburg and Fulton were always the bigger stops, but their depots were wood. Well, they were larger, they were wood. As a result, we still got a brick building that we got in, still in it today. This structure was started in September 1920 and was basically operational by Christmas, with final work completed in early 1921. We know of 7 alterations that they made to it during that time. This is interesting to show you how railroads were important for that day. This is out of a national newspaper, and all it does is say that a load of bricks has been brought to Newbern to start the depot, September 24, 1920. Can you imagine national newspaper today telling that a load of bricks had been loaded anywhere? Probably anywhere in Nashville to start a building. But yeah, they knew it back then. J.E. Milner, the last station master of the old postmaster. I worked at the post office, I can get it all mixed up. Of the old depot and the first station master of the new one. This is the Illinois Central system as it came to be, with Dyersburg, Newbern, and Trumbull, and right in the center of it, actually. Also in the 1930s, this was when Eleanor Roosevelt stopped long enough on a train to make, 1936, to greet children and down at Dyersburg, and was there. Don't think she got out, but it was just a whistle stop for trains. Illinois Central, from the 1930s to the 50s, the railroad was a steady supporter of needs as well as transport, clothes, food. I say caskets because we had a casket place up here, and it was blew up somehow. Something blew up, and we had caskets all over the place one night. And coal, auto parts, coal. There was a lot of coal-fired places in Newbern that used it for heating. The railroads at that time were the way to go. Flood of 1937 up in Lake County. near Ridgely. They still kept the trains going. This bus, I don't know if it was ever actually used at Dyersburg, but it was from the Jackson Dyersburg route. It said Dyersburg, Tennessee when I found it. They either transported people back and forth because of the railroad schedules. 1940s, most likely. Coal at Dyersburg. This is on the East Court Street Bridge looking north at coal facility to load up their trains. 1948, after the war, they realized that highways are going to begin to start taking over and air transport was becoming more prevalent. So the railroads upped the ante with some special neat trains. Nighttime Panama Limited from Chicago to New Orleans. The daytime city of New Orleans is what a lot of us will remember. It's what the train through here now is called. I've talked to crew members on this train. This was not at Dyersburg photographs, but they said they would go by Newbern and Halls doing about 95 miles an hour. Amtrak today does about 70. They could do the route in about 15 hours, and where it takes over 19 for Amtrak. So it shows you a little bit of how the Southern Express. This is one of the trains that would stop at Newbern. It was the mail train, basically. Now Elvis comes to Newbern. Young members concert here. Probably not. He was a he was a construction worker on a highway project up on the north side of town about a year and a half before he became well known. What we don't know is, and he said to stay in this boarding house right here off of, on the other side of the tracks, which is now gone. This is the 1970s photograph. What we don't know though is, did he use this depot to get here and back from where he down at Memphis? A possibility he could have. So we just kind of throw that in. The late 1950s and 60s, the railroads begin to decline. You've got interstate highway systems, you've got airlines, you've got personal transport in your cars taking effect, reduced rail goods locally, passenger service ends at Trimble, Newbern by 1963. They use this as a storage area and a freight office up into the 1970s. 1964 picture, this is a picture of the Dyersburg Depot with a track inspector car. Kind of neat to look at and see that. People from the 60s working on the line, mainly the line to Tiptonville. Kids from Newbern getting a trip to Fulton. They would do this annually, early 1960s, late 1950s, be transported back in another way. But they would get on here at the depot and ride the train to Fulton. That's not possible now. By the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, the railroad eventually will begin to withdraw its sidelines and concentrate on more of its mainline service. Dyersburg and Newbern depots were allowed to deteriorate. Dyersburg loses the yard, turntable, and roundhouse. Excuse me. Amtrak takes over passenger service in 1971. The routes to Jackson closes in the 1970s. The route to Tiptonville was sold off to local operations in 1983. Illinois Central sells its depot to the Newbern in 1990. The city restores it, and the Amtrak moved to stop from Dyersburg up here in 1992, and then the Canadian National Railroad, which the train just passed here, took over in 1998. This is one of the great pictures of the Dyersburg Depot. 1971 color photograph. See the mail area right there, piggyback cars, probably off of the city of New Orleans from 1971. Great photograph of the Dyersburg Depot made one night. It's staged though. This is Mr. R.A. Folks. He was already gone. Mel Patrick wanted him to come back, set up the bank lights behind here. He wanted this photograph at night. It does give us an indication we have one of these, the equipment that they use to talk with the train. The train knew he was coming. The guy was supposed to wave as he went by, and imagine with all those bank lights on the other side, it's basically powered by a car battery. I bet he was still seeing spots when he got to Halls. So he probably, but the picture was made. It's a good picture of the Dyersburg Depot inside the office area in their bay window. This is the GM&O Depot across from that, 1977. A photograph of it, a painting of it, which we have in our depot, made by Terry Atkins, based on that picture in 1970s. That's the roundhouse at Dyersburg, what was left of it, and the turntable by 1973. The Dyersburg Depot by 1973 in deteriorating shape. Newbern Depot, not in too good a shape, still a double line, Illinois Central Gulf at that time they combined. This is the track at Folks with their depot siding at that time. Now what it looks like, a single line. 1976, the Amtrak derailed at Dyersburg. Train hit a rail that had been hit by a car. No one was killed. It was Thanksgiving Day. Wreck here in Newbern, 1978. And that's what they replaced it with. This was the depot in Dyersburg after it burned in 1979. They replaced it with that right there. And that silver bench, when we moved it to Newbern in 1992, we've still got that right there outside today. The Ken took over operations of the Dyersburg to Tiptonville line, and the West Tennessee Railroad actually operates them out of the area. The passenger train, the only one that I know of that went from Dyersburg to Tiptonville as a special on our dinner train went up there and ate, and that man went way too fast. I tell you a whole story about that. His name was Leroy. I was going to try to take pictures as the train went by all the crossings, maybe these two. I made that picture. The track was supposed to be about 25 miles an hour. He was doing about 45 to 50. And it was all I could do to get down there at that crossing. The manual focus camera and capture that right there. They said down close the rope, the cars was doing like this, and they just cleared it. And Cindy, I think you rode that train with Trey. Yeah, so it was pretty rough. I was expecting to hear that it crashed. Newbern Depot 1990, the interior of the brick was okay, but the interior was bad to the point that Newbern could actually condemn it. Railroad wanted $75,000 for it. The city bought it for $15,000. This is our museum room. That's the bay window. The trains you'll see are right there in that area. And they wound up restoring it. This was one of the walls. You see how bad it was? It was just completely to pieces. Coal furnace down underneath the building. We can't go down there because of safety reasons, but it's still there. So, but the rail lines nowadays, they still go through here. We still have lots of trains as we've seen two today, but they don't provide local goods anymore. They provide service to the factories, they provide service to the farmers, taking the grains out. Photograph of the city of New Orleans, now the nighttime train. Amtrak stopping here, about 3,000 to 4,000 people normally a year use this depot for that service. Nice photograph of Illinois Central going over the tunnel outside south of Newbern. Brent, is one of your shots for the CN going by. Another one of the trains at night. We wish they stopped in the daytime, but they don't. They were zipping by. That thing comes in, you think it's going to run by, and it just simply stops all at once. Back in July 2020, we had an accident here where the train hit a truck, and the truck like taking out the bay window of the depot. No, it fortunately did not. We managed to get it repaired. This is one of my favorite photographs made by Darren Dawes back in 2015 of the CN Railroad at Dyersburg. This depot would have been over on the right. All that snow that we had. Great shot of from Jim McPherson photography of the coal train. That's an example of the train that it comes through Dyer County. Sorry, it comes through Dyer County. Got away from the microphone. And you will not go into power plants south of us, but you won't receive the electricity from this. This is an example of a train coming through that provides no services for our area. These going to Memphis or even northeast Mississippi for the power plants. They all run it backwards. They come out of southern Illinois with it, and but it's still a lot of transport through here that is meant for different things, other places. This is Trimble, 2022 train coming around the curve up there. But photograph was made where the depot was located. Nighttime, evening was made by Ben Hanna. He's in the military. We used this for a while on our Facebook page. Amtrak normally stops at night, but occasionally they're late, and I managed to get a photograph of this right here on the, it was about 5 hours late one morning in February, and so I got a southbound picture of the daylight train here. Again, it's basically trains that go through. They still use Illinois Central equipment. They're hard to find, rare to see now. Illinois, the CN still does that. So, railroads are still important here in Dyer County, to our industries, to our farmers, but the methods of what they do has changed. And we close the program here just saying that we're fortunate to have railroads like this still here. Jackson, for example, doesn't have a major railroad that goes through it anymore. It's serviced by industrial service line. But hopefully we'll have this rail line for a lot longer. I think we will, because it's on the part of the Canadian National, the north-south main line through here. And so it's been quite an experience from the beginning to the end. We're back to making it where we can have a rail service and still prosperous in the county because of it. So, are there any questions anybody has? Yes, sir.
Lynn, back earlier, you mentioned about the water tower in O'Brien. That water tower is still standing. And you can actually see it, you have to be close by, but it's covered up with vines, but Darren can tell you all about it, but it's still there. It's over 100 years old.
Yes, sir.
And you was talking about that shade locomotive. There used to be a shade that ran from Miston to Pagoda and a little bit beyond to Campbell Brown.
Could be. They said that it probably was on loan, may have just been moved in here, something like that, because they didn't think that it was direct Illinois Central. So obviously didn't have it. Yes, sir.
There is portions of the railroad that ran from Dyersburg to Alamo. It still has some of the railroad signs, and the business that I worked at, trains would stop there, deliver gasoline, propane, and coal, and it was on its way to Jackson. There is still portions of it you can
You can
still
see it, yeah. You can see the road bed, for example, that
Yeah.
off of Beaver Road, they've got the poles, power poles on the old right of way. Occasionally you can see places like that, even portions of the tracks still. So, any other questions? Yes, sir.
On a 1920s period map out in Findlay, Tennessee, along the railroad there in the Jackson Crossing, they had on the diagram private platform and public platform on either side of the track. Do you have any idea what that means?
No, unless they just had a private stop, like it might have been a building or a house or something that they, right on the other side of it, just used it. So in other words, they didn't maintain it. So, but if you got time, you can go down to our museum. We've got several things in there. The oldest item includes on the other side, the cases on the far side, the link pin system. It was the pin would drop into a chain. The knuckle coupler, this is before the knuckle coupler. Knuckle couplers, like you see now, were built back in the 1880s, the earliest. This came from Dyer County. It was found in a ditch. It's the oldest item we have. It probably came from the 1870s, maybe, off of Paducah and Memphis Railroad or the Chesapeake and Ohio part. We don't know for sure, but we got them down there. Other things like the Y-stick, when they would hand up information to train engineers when the full radio days, different things like that. So if you have a chance, you can go down there and see those items. So, Annie, I'll turn it back over to you.
Let's give Lynn a big round of applause.